everyone. I'm Professor Margaret Rogers Van Coops, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of Katie Kamara and myself. We usually do Dr. Margaret and Dr. Katie Speaks, but unfortunately she's not too well and dealing with a lot of other things that one has to do in this world for normal living. So I told her to have a break, and I'm going to take over. And the interesting thing is that I've had a lot of interest in how I was studied and so on, because being born in 1942, Midsummer's Day, 24th of June, when a V-1 bomb went over the top of the hospital and landed right across the road and wiped out many people's lives that day, that I and many others could live, was the story that my mother told me when I was older, so that I would understand just how lucky I was that I survived the war and went on to actually be a child healer, and from there on into other things. So I thought it might be interesting that for many Americans and foreigners around the world, that they have no idea just what it was like how old am I? 79 years ago when I was born. I think it's very important to understand that the position of society was entirely different from today. We had class distinction, we had royalty, we had upper class, we had middle class, we had working class, and we had the street people. And none of these integrated. So a lot of fear, pain, anger, guilt, sorrow, distress from the wars. And we have to remember, prior to 1939 was World War I, 1916 to 1919, which was also a very, very bad time for not only England but Europe and Americas as well. So what we have to understand is that the world was not the same as it is today. So if I look back to my ancestors and their stories that they told me so long ago, husbands often were well established. They had the lordship, they had the earl, or they had a good job working for some company. And so they were in a position of know-how. They might be a member of parliament in England, or in Europe, other countries had their status as well, very equal in many ways to the British status, because Britain had controlled a tremendous amount of the world during those two wars, and was known as the powerful, most fully leadership type model that was available to those who wanted to study and learn. Now, back in those days, in the late 18 and early 1900s, women were encouraged to study geometry, history, geography, these kinds of things. They weren't really seriously taught the full effect of these subjects. They were introduced as a talking factor, that one would know how to carry on a conversation without looking an absolute idiot. Meanwhile, the boys were pressured to really study and know all the answers to whatever was going around and about in those days. And of course, if I move over to my world, which is a world of psychology and psychiatry and medicine and healing, in those days there was very, very little known about anatomy and physiology. We have to go back in time to ancient people who were investigating the bodies by taking cadavers, dead bodies, taking them into a so-called, in quotes, university somewhere in Russia, all the way to Europe, into England, where students were male and were gathered around to watch the chief surgeon cut open a body, pull out certain parts and explore it. Not even in a laboratory, but rather in the middle of a speaking, teaching room. So there was no idea of cleanliness, there was no idea of protection from germs or anything that might be in that body, so nobody was wearing masks. In fact, when I look at my ancestors who were working in these kinds of things, they were just wearing common or garden wrap over overalls. Hands might have had some kind of very, very thick rubber gloves on, but not really, because one couldn't feel the texture and the sensitivity of the bodies as they explored them. And of course, while this was going on, society was very much setting the rules and regulations as to our place in society. So men were the upper dogs, men were the ones who were going to control the country. Women were going to be the ones who stay at home and moderate the home according to children, servants, and so on, until one comes down to the people on the street. And those people on the street were usually doing chores for the rich and wealthy, or something interactive with the middle class, who were managing the seesaw balance between the upper and the lower class. Meanwhile, we also had street people who were living on the street, begging for scraps, and often died at a very young age. And unfortunately, they became the cadavers for the doctors to explore, because nobody could afford to bury them. And nobody really wanted to bury them, because the family usually was long lost and forgotten. So a society that we lived in the turn of the century was not anything like we have today, nor were the standards of education for men and women equal. And so when I was born during the Second World War, after the First World War was finished and completed, there had been a sort of upgrade in Europe, that women had been supportive to the men, and they should be appreciated a little more. But let me go back prior to that war and say categorically here that most men married a woman of status who had a dowry. And once she married that man, then her dowry became his property. And he was supposed to manage it for her, so that should anything happen to him, then she would in some way be taken care of, especially since there would be children and so on. So everything was focused on inheritance, everything was focused on bearing boys into the world so that the family tradition could carry on. And if in some cases where the husband died young, the woman would inherit everything again, but would be encouraged to remarry an older gentleman who would have more sense and care in taking an awareness of her status, manage her money, and in some cases take it away from her. So here's one example. If a woman was considered to speak up for her rights, to defend her household, to protect her children from the husband, who was, shall we say, an argumentative drunk most of the time, having gone out and about and socialized in the early hours with prostitutes or whatever, and then to come home and lord it over the family. Should she protect herself, then what would happen was the husband would pull in a few medical doctors from the local college, which could have been Cambridge or Oxford, that was all that existed in those days, to then write out a paper that his wife considered depressed, mentally unmanageable, and therefore needed to be locked away in an asylum. And this went on right up until the 1920s and 30s. So many women who were of good stock, who had inherited money from their parents, were then imprisoned into a mausoleum of a mental asylum, where they were promptly forgotten. Family members were asked not to go near the place because they were under treatment. And of course the treatment was electrical shocks, where they would put a rubber in the mouth, put stimulants onto the brain, and then electrodes next to that, and then whack them with electricity straight out of the electric plug, which of course would send them all over the place, shaking and twittering and ruin a lot of the neurons in the brain. This went on for quite some years until in England, I think it was in the 1930s, they started to make laws that women could not be so dreadfully abused. But by the time I was old enough to understand all this, being about 4 or 5 years old, World War II had finished just about. And unlike today where they talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, the soldiers came back, be they colonels, brigadiers, generals, or street people who'd been called up as regular soldiers who'd been wounded. Well, they were all treated the same. You'll come back to your country, you must fight to put your country back on the map. So whether you are a general or a soldier, you must pull up your socks and stand tall and offer your services in any way that you could. Meanwhile, the women who were still sewing socks and who had been also running all the factories in England during the Second War were actually beginning to educate themselves by reading clubs, organizations that would support women in standing away from their husbands who were abusing them, beating them up, I might add, was frequent, being hit and locked in your bedroom, not being able to see your children or control the house, and eventually from there being put into asylum. Well, by the time I was 16, I was brought into the world of asylums. I was working as a nurse for bedpans and washing clothes and doing all sorts of things like this, as my father called it, a skivvy's job. He allowed me to do it. I gained permission. I had to have his handwriting signature in order to hand it into the teaching hospital, who then accepted me to be able to learn to be an auxiliary nurse. Now, an auxiliary nurse, in terms of history, and Nightingale, who was the founding of the Nurses Association of Great Britain, Florence Nightingale went to the Crimean Wars, the only woman on the front lines, who was later followed by more who volunteered, because back in those days it was considered that only a man could be on the front line and only a man could be a doctor. And so Florence Nightingale, considering nursing might be another way into the nursing schools, did do her training the best way that she could to learn bandaging, dressing wounds and things like this, and learning about antibiotics in the early sense of the word. Honey was used, and penicillin, things like that had been discovered by then. So there was a lot going on. If the men were in the Africa or anywhere like that, they got bitten by mosquitoes and got malaria, and nobody knew how to treat that at all in those days. So there were a lot of illnesses and diseases, pardon me, a lot of illnesses and diseases that came back from 2 world wars. Now, I'm not mentioning all the other ones before and after because there's too much to talk about. But what I want people to understand is that my world for any woman in those 2 war periods was to put on an apron and be a help to the doctors. And of course, while you're on scene and you're helping the doctors, then you're actually listening to what they're saying, just like the males were, who were following around like sheep. Only we women were attending. We were dressing the wounds. We were looking at their hands that were eaten up with rheumatoid arthritis because of the cold, and they couldn't straighten them anymore. We were looking at how we could straighten a body that had been stuck under a rabble of the bombs that had gone off, and then all the rocks had fallen down and all the bricks and things on top of them, and so they've been trapped down there for a very long time. and being stuck in a position that you couldn't move, because if you moved you might bring even more rubble down on top of you, was dreadfully frightening and very scaring for those people. So those people were also put in a mental home because they were considered depressed, miserable, and incapable of moving anymore because they'd frozen in that position and were unable to stand up or walk or be normal in any sense of the word. So they were considered not sociable, they couldn't mix with society, or they couldn't work in a factory. So they were stuck in these mental asylums, into which I walked. Now, I can tell you that I saw through the window, thank God I didn't have to actually be in the room my first time, was to see someone having a rubber piece put in their mouth, the electrodes on their head, and then hearing the zapping noise of the electricity and their body going like this and shaking from head to toe. And I was horrified because I had no idea this was still going on. And when I went home and told my parents that I'd seen this done in this home and hospital for incurables, as it was called, they just were like, oh, well, yes, I'm afraid that still goes on. And I was like, well, can't someone stop this? Isn't there some way of changing the rules? Oh, it takes time. Then by the time it's done, they'll be dead. Why should we worry? Why should we care about this? Now, because I was growing up and, tremendous amount of emphasis was put on religion and philosophy. So here I am studying why religion has the effect on people. We had radio shows and things. We all had to crowd into a room and listen to some padre or some Catholic priest or some Jewish person. We never knew really who they were. They were supposed to be famous, but no, we didn't know who they were as children. And we would listen to whatever they were saying and make notes. And I'm fortunate enough that I was always born psychic, so I had spirit guides in my head teaching me. And so while the teacher's standing up and saying, well, this is the normal for this religion, and now that you've all heard that, we want you to understand that you are born Christian, so you needn't worry about the Jewish or the Buddhist, because you're not going to meet anyone like that. So just focus on your religion that you've been brought up. Well, I was disgusted even then, because I realized already, having Siddhartha Buddha in my consciousness, that there were other religions and they were equally as important to everyone else around the world. But of course I had no understanding of real geography. I was always the idiot in my geography class. I could draw wonderful maps, but I couldn't put the country or where it was or whatever. I just wasn't into it. How could I help people if I had to just study geography? Now, history was very interesting because it took us back through time, and of course we went back to the ancient Egyptians. And I was very fortunate that my grandpa worked with Carter in Egypt, and also found a lot of graves in England were ancient too. There was a lot of research. They were coming and going and doing all sorts of things. I've got photos of proof of the pudding of them together and doing their work. But more importantly, as I got to my teenage years, my grandfather took me aside whenever we went to visit in Hove, Brighton, and say of my consciousness, you are in the theme of the family a lady, and therefore you must know what I've been working on, and you must understand this. Well, one of the first things he taught me was dowsing of water and minerals under the ground, which apparently I did quite well at the grand age of 6 or 7. And he came home, I remember him really very proud of me, telling the family that I'd achieved something or other. Later, when I was probably about 12, he took me to a site where we could see the spaceship had landed. I could see all the burned area, and he took me back a year later, and wherever that ship came from and left and went to, it left the burned ground, and on top of that, I was able to witness that no plants grew on the burned ground, which fascinated us at the time because we didn't understand the fuels or the things that were used in a spaceship in those days. However, my grandfather, having been a colonel in the First World War and on the home front in the Second World War, was also in India for many, many years finding wells and dowsing them at that, and always being successful in finding them, as well as finding treasures and graves and all sorts of things that I mentioned earlier on. So I was stimulated by this to want to know what they were finding, how they were finding it, and there were way too many stories to tell, but I will say here and admit very freely that the pictures of my grandfather standing with his men underneath the chin of the Sphinx on dirt was what he was working with back in those days. And he even told me that the Sphinx face was worn away by water, and that he had dowsed around and knew that the entire aspect of Egypt had been underwater. Well, you might say, well, that's quite a deduction for a man of those times. But now, today, in modern times, they have proved that the pyramid and the Sphinx were underwater. And so you can see, being born into a family of psychic, physical awareness type people who were also leaders in the world was forced on me, whether I liked it or not, to be a lady, to be able to hold a very good discussion and speak my mind about things, which fortunately today gives me the ability to be, I hope, a good teacher. So what did I learn in the basis of working as a 16-year-old nurse for 3 or 4 years? I forget how long I did it. And integrating that with the number of patients that I was dealing with, who were all women, by the way, who had been forcibly abused, badly treated from the First World War into the Second World War, to be bombed and blown up and wounded very badly. So I had these kinds of people to deal with. And there were some women who would come up and say, "Girl, pick up my shoe and put it on right now." And I'd be like, "Would you like to say, please, would you put it on? Don't talk to me like that. I know exactly what I'm asking for. You're just a servant, just a skivvy. Dress me." That was one particular woman that I remember very well, who was always moaning and groaning. But I thank her for her existence in my life, because I saw the snobbery. I saw that in my family too, I might add, but I saw the conditioning. I saw the limitations. I saw the restrictions. I saw the bad treatments that were done to women with electrical impulses. And then, lo and behold, the lobotomy started. And they were going in and jabbing in the brain, trying to find out which parts were affected, so that they could actually say they were healing that person. Well, after they came back from surgery, what I saw was a zombie. This dominant woman who'd been always about put on the shows and talk the way I just showed you, had that done. And she came back and she was like, and I said, "Do you want your shoes on?" "What?" And I thought, oh my God, what have they done? So I immediately asked the senior nurses, because remember I'm a junior nurse, I immediately asked them, "What's happened here?" And they said, "Well, they're experimenting. These people are here forever. They've got to know how the brain works, and that's the future." And of course that was an eye-opener for me, because I immediately locked into that with my spirit guides and said, okay, so when I go nursing, I'm going to learn everything. I'm already studying anatomy and physiology and psychological aspects of the brain in my biology classes and my science classes and things like that through 15 to 16 years old. So I had a very good education. So I'm thinking, well, I pretty well know everything. Oh, was I wrong? Because when I look back now to what I know today compared with what I knew then, I knew absolutely nothing, nor did the doctors. For example, if they were going to remove an appendix, they would do an incision all the way up the belly, right to the top, so that they could check, open the body up and look in there and see the large descending, ascending, I should say, on that type where the appendix is, ascending colon, look at the ileums, the small bowels that you know about today, and then pull out the appendix, and whether it was infected or not, cut it out, assuming that that was the right thing to do. Well, of course, they had penicillin, so they had some antibiotic to make sure, and they sprayed stuff in there and did whatever they could, and then sewed them up with these great big knots and bumpy, lumpy wounds. And so you can imagine that you have a big scar running up the side of your body if you heal and recover very well, with lots of branches off, like a tree, of all these big scars from all this sewing up that was not particularly well done. But of course, that was those days, and that was the way they had been taught from the pioneers of First World War. Being on the front line, and someone comes in with a wound and they're gashed up, and you just got some gut, and you've got to sew them up as quick as possible and try and stop the bleeding. So that was a main idea about nursing in those days. Well, then, I was studying all this because I'd already made up very clear that I wanted to be a nurse, even though my father didn't want me to be a nurse, and had agreed to let me do the skivvy job, wiping bottoms and washing them down and cleaning them up after they've had these bad treatments, listening to their woes and pros and cons about their life and their restrictions and limitations, taught me a great deal. And it was probably the best present my father gave me, unaware of the fact that he was actually trying to put me off from being a nurse. Well, by the time I'd done my 3 years of high school, which was taking me up to being 18, nearly 19, then I went over to become a state registered nurse. What that meant was I had to study to be a nurse who could run a ward. Now, in those days, we didn't have individual rooms or, 4 people or 3 people or 2 people to a room. Oh, no. We had 36 beds on a ward. And when you're nursing in that predicament, you have to know the background of every single nurse, every single patient's nursing notes. So when the doctor would come on his rounds, trailing behind him his doctors who were studying, who were housemen, as we called them, who were not fully divested into being a doctor yet. Because we were nurses, we had to hold the notes and hand them out while the doctor was teaching the students, male students, I might add, no female students. All the nurses were female. And I was fortunate that I often got to carry the notes around, and so I got to listen and learn what the doctor was saying to the student doctors. And it was very important too that if you showed the stability, leadership of background, then you were acknowledged for being someone who was of some quality and therefore could be trusted. So when it came to taking a patient down for surgery or bringing them back after they've had surgery when they're unconscious with a tube down their throat, that was my job. I was considered responsible enough to go to surgery and observe surgery too. One of the most upsetting things I think I ever saw was a leg without a body. One is able to see a body without a leg and get used to that. But to see a leg lying on a slab on its own, it's quite horrifying, really. Those are the kinds of things I had to encounter in order to find the steel in my body, because I was very empathetic and sympathetic to all my patients. And of course, being psychic, I was very, very aware of their needs in some way, shape or form. So once I got into state registered nursing, I have to admit I didn't complete it all, because I found the love of my life, so I thought, and married and had a couple of children. But I married a man who was trained in psychology and psychiatry and was also a nurse. So I was able to pick his brains, go to his works, meet the doctors, sit in on some of the therapy sessions, and really learn a great deal about psychiatry and psychology. And so, of course, I hit the books. Now, in those days, I have to be honest with you and tell you that there was no qualification beyond becoming a psychologist. And in those days, it was all relative to schizophrenia, paranoia, rigid mind, these kinds of things. And that was all you studied. And that was all the books we had. And of course, I avidly took in everything and went around looking at the way personalities were developed and what people were saying and doing through the class structure. And by the time I got to an age where I had something to say, I was also highly psychic, a medium in the churches, and was integrating my psychic skills with my knowledge of psychology, psychiatry, and nursing to bring myself into awareness at the time to be one of the very few mediums who could read a person in terms of personality, character, their traits in the way they conducted themselves in their life, and also to give them advice on how to transform their stuck views. By that I mean learned views that were so steeped within them that they had no idea that there was another choice and a way to be. So people were either vigorously addicted to being a leader or a follower. There was no in between, there was no improvising, there certainly wasn't too much emphasis on the arts as a career. Though I did have the fortune to meet some famous artists and to work as their models at some time. But that was again another insight into learning, to understand how the pot paints could be blended on a canvas in a way that could say something, suggest something to people. So when it was hanging on the wall, you could sort of gaze at it and go, oh, I see a face in that, and oh, there's a flower over there. And was it by accident that came out, by just spilling paint all over the place and then having someone roll about on it? Or was it a creation, an imbalanced one might be, but a creation that the spirit within a person was inspired to roll that way instead of that way, or up that way instead of down this way? And that brought me into the understanding of choice. And I began to talk and teach and lecture through the Spiritualist Association and, of course, the growth of the festivals of mind, body and spirit and many other events that were taking place, to talk about the way we think and feel in all my healing courses and things that I was teaching. And yes, they were nouveau, as they called it, unusual, strange, different, but I was a pioneer. And pioneers, just like people like let's say Marconi invented the phone, okay, and music and records and all these things that came afterwards. Someone has to start with something. And so I took the basis of original psychology, which they called psychiatry in those days, which was the state of mentality in terms of either being repressive, oppressive, suppressed, reduced in some way in status in the world, restricted and limited by class and distinction, and all these things and more, much more, did I really study and question people, interview people, do readings with people, find out the core of their beings, all with my spirit guides helping me at the same time. Now, there appeared somewhere in my motherhood of having 2 children, so I'd be about 22, that a friend of mine birthed an autistic child. I went over to see what I could do because I'm already healing many people with my abilities. I already know about chakras that nobody else does. I already know about the energy of the 5 bodies that nobody else does. In a time which would be 1962 or 4, somewhere around that time, when I was the strange kid on the block because nobody else was talking about what I was talking about. And of course, I went to churches and synagogues and different places when I was in my teenage years, and I kept up those links in my locale. So whenever I was able or invited, I would go and talk and teach about the states of mind and emotions. That's what I called it in those times. And so, the idea of going to university and studying all about schizophrenia, paranoia, and I won't go into it all now because it's too much of it. I'd already read it all out of books from the library, and when I investigated the students who were actually studying, they weren't learning anything different, except for there was an understanding now of hypnosis from Mesmer, who was in the courts, in the palace, mesmerizing the nobility and those who hobnobbed with them, and everyone was talking about hypnosis. And I sort of didn't know that I was hypnotizing people when I was very young. I would gaze into their eyes and I would say something and they'd fall asleep. And I didn't do it deliberately, but as I was talking, they'd fall asleep with my voice. And by the time I was in my 20s, I'd learned about pendulums because of my grandfather. So I was holding pendulums in front of them and they were going off and so on. So I was exploring so many different things about the state of the mind and of the heart. Now, nobody was really correlating both. They would either be all into the brain or all into the body. And the heart was left out on a limb because it was one should keep the upper lip and not talk about how you feel, because nobody wants to hear someone going on and on about misery. So pretend you have a wonderful life and everything's gorgeous. Now imagine if you're on the streets and you're begging for a penny, and I mean old coppers in those days, for you to go and buy a loaf of bread. Yes, you could buy a loaf of bread in the late 1900s for a penny. So my grandmother told me. I wasn't around. But by the time I was old enough to go shopping for my grandma to pick up a loaf, it was all of about 3 pence. Now, you can't imagine going to the store today and buying a loaf for 3 cents. Yet, in those days, the average wage was only coppers. And so the money was relative to today's, where we get so much more money, but our prices are so high that the money doesn't go anywhere. So it was the same back then in those days. And after the Second World War, I remember that everybody was on ration books and everybody was moaning and groaning about how the laws that be were not covering their expenses. that Parliament was not coming up with new rules and regulations to suit and change the circumstances. I remember all the adults talking about that. I was about 12 and the new Queen was being crowned. As I've been saying on some of my shows, I'm coughing when I remember back, because I'm still dealing with eliminating some of the stuff that was bulldozed into my brain box to be the facts. Okay, so what you need to understand here is that psychology had not reared its head in the true sense of the way people think of it today. So we who were into metaphysical studies were channeling information from our spirit guides and adding it to the old stories of the 1890s to the 1940s. And in the process of doing that, we were learning that the brain had far more about its presence in the head as to what it's actually doing. Now, you have to remember that when I was nursing, there was much more focus on open up the body and see how the body works. So the idea of looking at the brain was in itself really a strange and unusual thing. In fact, they didn't really move into the science of the brain until around Sir Winston Churchill died. They wanted to take a part of his brain and preserve it for many years, and they did the same with Einstein's brain. So when you think there's something between the death of Einstein and the death of Sir Winston Churchill, what were they looking at? The way that slice of brain was to the way that slice of brain was later, 50 years later. I was curious. I was interested in that. But more importantly, I was beginning to learn from my spirit guides that our entities, the people who come into this world, come in with a coding. And so by the time I was in my 30s, I was actually understanding that we each were encoded with a tune, if you like. It's the way I thought of it then, because I was singing and dancing and on stage as well, having fun doing those things. And to me, the voice, the tone, the sound, the resonation of that sound hit my body. And when I felt that, I felt a shift in my energy. So that was a clue to me to bring it back into psychology and psychiatry. I'm feeling something's in my eyeball. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so as I started to study with my spirit guides and with certain people who set themselves up in those days to be psychologists and psychiatrists, I have to tell you in all honesty that I taught them more than they taught me, because they would state ABC and I would put my hand up and say, but yes, but in ABC is XYZ. And they'd look at me and say, oh, I haven't thought of that. And I said, well, I'm getting that. Oh, you're psychic. Oh, well, and they would put it down. So I soon learned that if I was going to survive in this world, which was the best way that I should move forward. And ultimately, my spirit guide said, stay with the mediumistic side of your abilities so we can work with you. But while you're doing that, we will integrate psychology and psychiatry into your counseling sessions. I was happy because that allowed me to really go deeply into all my 1 hour sessions with people in England who were coming to me for help and direction. And believe you me, the number of issues they came with was so beyond counting that it gave me a tremendous amount of insight into the states of the conscious, subconscious, and deep subconscious minds, as well as how that affected the human body, the nervous system, the DNA, the RNA, the glandular system, the breathing system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, and of course the spirit itself. So I started talking about this at expos, mind, body and spirit events, places like that in my 30s, and I became quite popular in England and Europe, traveling about, and in a way unusual in those days, being invited on radio shows in the BBC and over different parts of the country. Went on tour with a friend, and he made that possible, and we had a very nice time together, unblocking the world's views, if you like, by sharing the things that we could say and do. And when I came back, having done that, I was in my 30s. The world was now shifting into accepting that we had a coding. Now, I knew about the coding, but I was in so much terror and issues myself. So here I have to explain the study of my journey, doing it upside down, inside out, back to front, in the wrong way of learning, coming in the back door, as it were, of science, and having all the experience that I had was the best way I possibly could have studied or learned at all. And I am so grateful to my spirit guides who made sure I had the best education possible from them. So by the time I'm in my 30s, accepted by the Spiritist Association of Great Britain, accepted by very many organizations in giving lectures and workshops and talks and so on, I became pretty popular, and was talking publicly about the emotional, mental, physical and spiritual aspects of conditioning, in how it limited us and restricted us from achieving our goals or rising above our status or moving on into an understanding of healing self and so on. There were so many aspects to talk about, and the only floor I had was a room full of people from time to time as events turned up. And of course one of those events brought me to the shrine in LA, where I was the keynote speaker for the British team of the first Mind, Body, Spirit event that lasted, I believe, for 7 days in those days. Our British one was 10 days. And on every day I was doing something. And part of what I did was a demonstration of messages. And that was clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and psychometry in those days. But behind it was the counseling, and behind that was the psychology and psychiatries, because we had to be careful how we said things, because people were not used to having someone tell them that their obsession on a situation is a mental illness. So when I came to the States to live here, I began to talk about all the things that I'd been talking about in England, and people were wide-eyed, open, shocked, because they'd heard none of this. And ultimately, when I was at one of the hypnosis events, where I was also a public speaker, I had the whole room full of hypnotherapists who come to learn from me the 3-mind induction. And the 3-mind induction was to take the conscious into the subconscious and the subconscious into the deep subconscious, where the truth lies. Nobody had that consciousness in those days, so I went on later to write a book about it. And I also taught people about the soul structure coding that nobody knew about, which gives us our DNA, our RNA, our personality. Today now, scientists and doctors have finally caught up where they're looking at the genes and the telomeres and all these things. Of course, I didn't have all these scientific names because those who came after me did actually come up with names themselves, scientific names. But while all this is going on, and so many doctors, foreigners from other countries are coming here, they go back to third world countries with no equipment, no x-rays, no this, no that. And so I was asked by the education authorities at UCLA if I would teach a program at the university to help the doctors go back to their countries train. And I was so excited, and because I did not have a PhD, they informed me that they would give me one based on the books that I had written. The books I had written were The Way to Oneness, and that became The Journey into the Unknown World, The Way to Oneness Revisited much later. That was published in German and other languages. I had meditation book that was published in Russian, Chinese, and English. I had breakthrough therapies, crystal acupuncture and pterogram therapy, where I'd researched how the body, the 5 bodies, the chakras, the soul vibration, the DNA, the RNA, was all encoded in the way I wrote it in that book, The Way to Oneness. So that was going on. And I had the diagram book that I'd had to actually draw myself because it was all in my head, how the acupuncture points worked and where they were and what you did and so on. And I had the rejection syndrome, where I was talking about how people are conditioned through the soul coding to do whatever they did, which wasn't necessarily what they needed to do or was absolutely wrong for them. And so these books were my thesis for my PhDs. And the professors at UCLA were like, oh my goodness, we've got no one who can test this because we don't know this information. I'm like, oh, well, what do we next? So they said, well, we have categories. So what I was given through the wing of the Universal UCLA and my qualification under Universal Christchurch as a minister ordained, and as a minister in England under Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, had already given me my psychiatry training, and so that was taken into consideration over there through hospitals that I'd studied, and you have to remember, none of this was taught at universities in those days at all. So when I came over here and I presented the books I'd written, they saw those as my thesis. And as a result, when they were studying and trying to decide what to give me, they ended up giving me 2 PhDs. One for my spiritual, works that I'd written about, my talks, my lectures, my ordination, my psychiatry in hypnosis, that kind of thing. And then the second one was given to me for my crystal acupuncture, pterogram therapy, the subsequent other therapies that came up, which was spiritual crystal acupuncture, Trinity Stone core pterogram therapy, Trinity Stone healing therapy, sensory touch therapy, all researched in great deal, taught in many different countries where students had certificates and diplomas. So all of that was considered as well, and so they were very happy to give me my 2 PhDs, and soon after that to offer me my professorship. That was back in 2004. Well, I wasn't really ready for a professorship. I was traveling to Japan and different countries teaching. I was too busy. I didn't even realize what a professorship would mean. Much later I found out I could get tenure for the research, but I'd already done the research, okay? And later on still I found out that it would give me social standing in my peers who are professors. So finally, about 10 years ago, I accepted it. I went back and I said, in the American schooling system, what does it require for me to get my professorship? And they said, Margaret, 5 years, you've got 50 years. So you're more than qualified for a professorship. And without a blink of an eye, I was given that. Now I'm learning how to use it. And what I'm trying to do is to build an online university of metaphysical studies, which will include psychology, psychiatry, coaching, counseling, and of course I've made a big jump in the way the rest of the world has changed. I just want to go back a little bit here and say probably what you know about is something like Edison's theories. Excuse me, I think my contact's trying to fall off my eye. Thank you. So in many different ways, what you would have learned and read in textbooks in school today is new. For example, I'll go back to autism. We discovered through psychic ability, through training, through tests, through trials and tribulations, that there were many different aspects to the deterioration of the brain relative to what we were eating, what we were thinking, and what we were doing. Way back in the early, well, I want to say late 50s, early 60s in England, we were becoming aware of that. So a few doctors were looking into that in England, which helped me immensely to understand that we could be acidic or we could be more alkaline, which opened the door much wider when I came to America. And I wish you to understand that whether we're looking at mesmer or whether we're looking at I'm trying to think of all these people and my mind's going blank because they're all dead, and whatever they open the door with, Carl Jung, for example, having people jump over great gaps, and I know one guy fell and broke his leg because he did it. It was too daring and it was too over the top at the time to push yourself beyond your fear. However, it was relative to let people know that fear was controlling them from not being able to move forward. And if you think of any of those kinds of therapies that were out and about, then you would say that they were of the time and opened a door to new consciousness. Now, someone approached me, because my name was Rogers, Margaret Rogers, just that then, and said, would you like to call your therapies Rogerian therapies? I said no, immediately. I did not want to have therapies named after me. I wanted things to be known for what they do. And so, hence the word crystal acupuncture, pterogram therapy, and so on. Pterogram is my name spelled backwards. However, there was some sense in it because there is the word agate in pterogram. There is terra of the earth, which is where agates come from. There's my initials, MR, and there are 8, ATE, what you eat. T is good for you, so there was all these different anagrams that I saw in it. So I said, that's it. And I've registered them, and they are serial marked or service marked. I always forget what they mean in different countries. And so I have the full power and ability to teach anyone, whether I'm teaching them therapies, reflexology, aromatherapy, shiatsu, dojin sing, all these things I added as well as they broke out into the world. I was actually mixing my own essential oils for my mother by gathering flowers, putting them in fat or lard on the windowsill, and then rubbing it on her feet, and it helped. So I had a doorway into something that most people don't have. my psychic skills, and I still use them today. I have people who will call me up and they're stuck on an issue with their hubby or friends. They can't see the wood for the trees, and I will break it down for them into a sensible structure that they can see and make choice. I never infer they must take the choice that I make or that their spirit guides make, because we as individuals must stand by our own choices, and choice comes easily when we stop rationalizing in fear, pain, anger, and guilt. So what do I tell people when I start working with them that I'm a therapist? Well, the bottom line, I don't anymore tell them I'm a therapist, because I'm not just a therapist, I'm a doctor. And I have the ability to be able to look into your body and see what is wrong. How do I do that? Psychodermotherapy. That's psychic, dermo, skin, therapy. You put your finger on the body, wherever you know there's pain. You allow the energy from that pain area to come into you, the medium, into your hand, up your arm, into your brain, where you will perceive an image. Now, the reason you see the image is because you've studied anatomy and you know what your body looks like inside, so you know what's wrong. Then you want to look at the structure of that organ or whatever it is, and you can go into greater detail. Because today we have marvelous videos and things that students can study in universities, I'm jealous. But in another way, I'm not, because I can go online and find all those pictures, and I can teach myself if I want to. Now, since my journey has been a unique one and an unusual one, and that I walked in the back door with 2 PhDs and my professorship, I want you to understand that my back door was far, far longer study work than anyone else. In fact, as I said, I'm 79. I've been working since I was 2, so you do the math, 77. And every 7 years of that, my spirit guides come to me and say, okay, another lesson, another beginning, another direction. So I've taken psychology and psychiatry into realms that most people won't look at. They don't even know they exist. For example, you are tied into your ancestors, and I can tell you all about them. And I can tell you the traits that you've inherited versus the ones you've discarded. I can tell you about the spirit world and how it affects you on a daily basis in your everyday life. I can tell you about past lives. All these things over the last 50 years have become popular to know. But more important, what's become popular to know is, how do I live in this world? How do I transform my life? How do I improve my standards of education? How do I move out of the ghetto into society? And the list goes on. And the bottom line is, the only way is to undo everything you believe to date. Does that make sense? Well, of course it does, because if you believed when you were a child that your mother will give you ice cream after lunch if you ate it all up, and you got ice cream for the first 2 or 3 years, until suddenly there wasn't any ice cream anymore because mum couldn't afford it, you suddenly had a reverse. After eating my dinner, there's no more ice cream. I must be bad. And your mother said nothing, but you're trying to make sense of it, and you make a controversial belief system. I used to be good, but now I'm bad. And that goes into your emotions, and from the emotions it goes into your brain, where your brain stores what position were you sitting in when you decided eating your dinner or whatever, or climbing a ladder hoping you're going to get ice cream. Whatever it is you're doing, you are adding a mountain onto your original idea. And so by the time you're an adult, you are full of ideas that are compounded shall we say, rubbed into the ground inside your feet and your nose and your senses everywhere, where you want to know what's going on, hence the nose. I want to see, I want to smell, I want to taste, I want to touch. So guess what? I'm going to be writing another thesis for you, all about the face, the neck, the head, and what do we say? So psychology never stops. Psychiatry never stops. Everything that we are is a unique being. We are individual. No two people are the same. We don't look out with the same eyes. We don't speak with the same tone of voice. We don't listen to words in the same structure. We may have been born in a different language and come to a different country and learn to use a different language. Now we're flipping backwards and forwards, Hispanic versus American, for example. Some of the girls who are doing that are very good at it. They're so spontaneous because it's become a habit to think this way or think that way and flip. But most of us, we're trying to interpret it. Okay, if I speak in French, excusez-moi, voulez-vous parler un peu? Will you speak a little bit? I know that off by heart because I used to speak French a lot. But now I can't because I've forgotten 99% of the words. But that one stuck. Just like when I was a child, I heard Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a big fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to visualize it. It was just there. It was a rhyme I learned off by heart. But did I know what it meant then? Of course not. Years later, I was reading about all those little nursery rhymes to find out those were the songs the musical minstrels would sing when they hit town to carry news from city to city. And Humpty Dumpty was one of the kings, Hanoverian kings, who never bothered to rule the country because he came from Germany and was an idiot. And so, they pulled him down. They wore him down till he killed himself or died or something. I can't remember quite what. So long ago that I studied all that. And in America we've got so many different cultures that have been mixed up, and now Europe's done it. And it's not long before, Singapore's done it, South America is doing it. And into this comes our babies born who are highly psychic, just like me. Only we have a difference now. We have research. When I was born, there was no research. Nobody knew anything about this, how the psyche worked. And as a result of my research and my teachings, I have over 20,000 students around the world who now understand and know how to use their psychic skills and are actually running their own schools, salons, and teaching people relative to their society and their ways and means. So I should be satisfied, shouldn't I? But no, I'm not, because I want the babies of today to grow up with mummies who are saying to their child when they say, "There's a monster in my room," to sit down with them and say, "Describe the monster. What did it look like?" "Well, it had 4 eyes, did it? And what else? Tell me more." "Okay, well, let's go in the room and let's see. Can you see it now? Is it here?" "Oh, no. When you saw it, were you sleeping?" "Well, I was waking up." "Was you dreaming?" "Well, maybe, I'm not sure." "Did it feel real?" "Yes." "Well, can you see it now?" "No." "Well, let's see if it turns up tomorrow. If it turns up, we'll look again. If it doesn't, we'll say it was part of your dream." See how I'm talking? Instead of the way I got it when I was a child. "What? There's no monsters in your room. You're a silly girl. You got a vivid imagination. Just a dream. Go and do your homework." Did that help me? No. But my spirit guides did. They told me what I was looking at. I was looking at lost souls, people who died, people who, come out of their bodies after death, and they knew they got wounded in the war, so they're wrapping in their mind some bandages around them, trying to find help. And so what did I say to my mum? There's a mummy in my room. She said, Mummy? I'm your mummy. What do you mean, mummy? So I said, someone with bandages on. She said, oh, who told you about mummies? I said, my spirit guide. What? That's what I got. And my mother later got into psychic stuff. But she always thought her daughter had a vivid imagination. Okay? So that's what I was up against. I don't want to see these young kids coming in who are being told that what they hear, see, touch and feel from the oneness is imagination, illusion. I want them to be taught to work with it. Some of it may be off the wall. Some of it may be their fantasy and illusion. But how can we tell till we listen to what they have to say? And so I'm teaching the mothers now to understand the psychic ability and how it connects with psychology, psychiatry, visualizations, arts, creativity, the passion of life, the exploration of the joy of discovering self, and so much more. This, to me, is what psychology means today. To be able to bring a child up into this world to know that they are equal to everyone else, that they are able to do their job, whatever it is, to the best of their ability, and everyone appreciates that. After all, example, my father taught me many years ago when I was just a tiddly girl, appreciate the dustman, which is your trashman in America. Appreciate they go through that trash, bury it, do whatever, burn it, and that you don't have to worry about it. So thank them nicely, and at Christmas give them a nice present. And so I would trundle along with my dad with a half a crown, which is old money in those days, which was a lot of money in those days, which is 2 shillings and 6pence, and go up to that trash man and say, thank you for picking up my trash, and give him my... And I felt good because I'd appreciated him. Okay? That was part of gentry, and that was as it should have been. We should appreciate those who work for us. We should give them time, compliment them, give them an understanding that without them our business would fluctuate and fall apart. So we really need your help. This is all psychology. This is plain, simple, everyday psychology, to be able to appreciate yourself, your talents and skills, the people you meet and chat with, even if they argue with you. Thank you, because you've brought me to an awareness that there's some different interview, some different point of view, some interaction in some way that's expanded my mind, taught me I like that more or I don't like that more. There's always something going on. The conscious mind loves new information. And so we search, we ask questions. Where have you been? What have you done lately? Oh, did you do such and such? Yeah. Oh, but you know, your such and such was different from my such and such. How has it changed? Oh, really? I can't imagine that. Maybe I should go see it. Opens up your mind to see things differently. Okay? We are news carriers. We are explorers. We are dedicated to finding happiness and joy in our life, even if we're living in misery. We are not born here to just destroy everything, though there are some people who think they are, because they're just so frustrated, so upset with the abuse that goes on around them in their home by people to people in front of them, or people running around with guns threatening them, or whatever it is. Violence is terrible, and it needn't be, because if we teach the children at a young age to be psychic, they'll know the kids that are ready to erupt and pull out a knife, and they won't be waiting around for it to happen, unless it's their destiny to help that person to put that knife away. Yes, I've been in scenarios where, using my psychology and psychiatry, I've been able to stop a person from killing themselves right in front of me with a knife. I'm going to stab it in their heart. It took a lot of patience, a lot of kindness, a lot of understanding their issues, which of course my psyche gave me, to be able to get them to realize that there was a reason to live. I won't talk about other people, but I will tell you that I work with the police in finding the murderers. Okay, I won't go into all of that now, but it all needs psychology, you need psychiatry, you need to understand how a murderer thinks or a thief thinks, and what they're going to do to attack you if they're going to attack you, and where are you at? Are you cool, calm and serene, thinking things through, observing, watching? All psychology, all psychiatry, all a part of the very essential way of understanding how you fit in with the rest of the world. And very important that you also understand that if you go down the rabbit hole into the mismatching of self with the negative people in this world, you will be demoralized. You will be pulled away from your beauty and your glory into the dark side. And if you are, why? Maybe you need to learn just what those people look like, think like, live like. Maybe one day when you're older and have more understanding, you'll go out there and help them. Maybe you'll work in the soup kitchen. Maybe you'll work in an education home for mums who are thrown out of their homes. Whatever you're going to do, it's going to be helpful if you do embrace some of the dark things, because the mind does embrace both the light and the dark. On a conscious level, you assimilate all the things you remember. And I'm here to tell you that those things have been exaggerated by your conscious mind time and time again, which is why when we go to court as a witness, unless you've written it down and put it away and never read it again, you will have embellished your memory, and what you say will not be the real truth of what you really saw. And what did you really see? Well, if you were looking with your third eye, your psychic eye, you would have noticed what colour the shirt was, or whether they were 3 foot or 10 foot. A little bit more information. And the police found me very interesting because I could not only hold the victim's clothing, but build a picture of what they last saw, because it's in the clothing. So I want you to understand that everything you wear is a psychological test too. You wear it because you like it or because it's something quick and easy to wear, but what were you thinking while you were wearing it? And if it wasn't washed, it's still in there after you're not around, so we can tell what you're up to, whether you're dead or alive. This kind of psychology and psychiatry is new to the world, but it is a part of the psyche. It is a part of the brain. And after all, the word psyche is the primary word for psychology. So it's been adapted to mean your intuitive, instinctive self, psyche. Okay? And I really did not like being called a psychic, okay, which is a little bit of the psyche. That's what it means, a small part of the psyche, a small part of something. But unfortunately in the times, I couldn't really walk around talking too much about psychology and psychiatry in a time when people didn't want to hear it. They wanted to hear that Auntie Sally was okay in the heavens on the other side. And then when I could give them those kinds of messages, they'd say, well, I'm still crying because I miss her and so on. Then I could introduce the psychology of it. And if it's really bad, get them into an exercise in some way where they can be in psychotherapy. Okay, and there are many ways. For example, if I play your favorite music, it will change your mood. If I play certain music that has certain key tones and you're lying down just receptive, you will change your point of view on an issue. That's just a few examples. There's so much to understand. If you decide to learn an art class and paint, you get out of your mind in terms of worrying about your issues, and all you can think about is, I love this color and I want to use it more and more. But what you're actually doing is healing your own aura with that color. Hence, the blue mood, the green mood, the red mood, and so on. The artist that escapes my name right now. I've crossed so many pathways with so many famous people, rich, famous people, who have had issues with their family, to everybody in the streets, who are in the soup kitchen and stuff like that. And my experiences throughout my life, I am so grateful to all those people who helped me to understand psychology, psychiatry, the religions of the world, the counseling, the coaching, the teaching of how important each individual is to the oneness. Your energy, my energy, 1,001 other people in this world right now are all having maybe a similar thought, and that thought is in some way being delved into by each individual to find out a way they can share it. And of course, when it's given out, the people who listen will doctor it a bit, change it a bit, play around with it a bit, invent a bit, be artistic and creative a bit with it. And so we evolve. And so we ascend into a great awareness. Today, I could even hypnotize you on here. All I have to do is say, look into my eyes if I get them on the right level. And I would count down and you would be hypnotized. And maybe I'll do one of those one day just for fun so you can see how hypnoidal you are. Yes, we are all hypnoidal. There isn't anyone who isn't hypnoidal. What is that, and when does it happen? Well, you could be driving your car and suddenly you're miles away thinking about a girlfriend or a boyfriend you met 20 odd years ago, and you blink and you come to and you think, oh, the car in front of me is braking, so it brings you back to now. And then you think, why was I thinking of that person? Well, you've made an etheric ribbon between them from those days when they were in your life, and they haven't cut it, you haven't cut it, and that etheric ribbon reminds you of a lesson you learned with them all that time ago. Find what the lesson is in your subconscious or deep subconscious, and then cut that ribbon. You're free of them, and you move on. And wonder of wonders, you are intelligent, and you will find a way to process the answer and use it in your everyday life. So if you think about starting work and wanting to be a therapist, a coach, a counselor, a psychic, I want you to understand that you will be learning, if you study with me, a great deal of psychiatry and psychology, because you never know who's going to come in that door. You could have someone who's ready to do harm. I had actually a friend years ago, no names here, who was warned to not bring people home. She did one day late, and unfortunately she was found murdered. And they believe to this day that that person she knew because she was stabbed in the back. Unexpected, wasn't knowing it was going to happen. I was in Japan, I was leaving, so I couldn't help the police. But when I came back, they asked me if I knew who'd done it. And I had to say no, because it was a stranger to me. But I did pick up where she was, and they agreed that's where she was the last time, in some nightclub. So she definitely took some little man or woman that she thought needed help back to her place to help them. And they turned on her. And she was warned. See, the oneness knows. Now, I was driving up the road just the other day, a road I drive along all the time, windy, twisty road, and I usually do about 35, and I'm pretty good at that road. And this day, my spirit guide said, drive slowly. So I turned it down to 20, and right where I would have been zooming past, someone pulled out. Had I been doing 35, I might have slammed into them or had to go around them, but I surely would have been, So I didn't need a shock. We all give ourselves shock, emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually at different times in our life. And those stay in our body. And we build up fears about those shocks, and we get worse and worse. There's so many things in your brain that could be eliminated, and that can be done with hypnosis. But first I have to do an intake. I have to listen to you, hear how you talk, hear how you perceive the world, hear why you worry about this and worry about that, why you're a world worrier even, like worrying about whether they're going to have an earthquake in Indonesia or somewhere when they're sitting on a funeral pile of lava. Okay, yeah, they're used to it. But so is Japan. But why are they there? They can't just turn around and leave because it might blow up. It's the way life is. We live in the now. And it's very important that you live in the now. Now, I've been talking quite a while about me and the reason that I am a doctor and a professor, and how I've come in the back door with it through the experience of change and transition that's been happening since the early 1900s to now 2021. That's a lot of years. And when you think how the mental health has changed, there's no one doing electrical stuff to people's brains anymore. Not in this country anyway, or any European country. Maybe they are in countries that we are not allowed inside to see about, because they're way behind us. But then again, women and men are rising up saying, hey, that's old, we don't want that, we want new rules, we want new regulations, we want new ministries, we want new leaders in our governments. This is the Aquarian age. I've talked a lot about that. The future is about listening. If we don't listen, how are we going to learn? I love to teach, and I always spend a lot of time in my classes making sure that my students understand what negativity is, how to eliminate, reevaluate it, transform it, change it, and become positive. It's very important that we all understand that we have within us the mechanism to be the most positive, sweetest person on the planet, if you want to be. However, you might be a bossy bitch, or you might be someone who's at the top of a big, let's say company with thousands of people working underneath you, and all you do is turn up, sit at your big table and say to your staff, how's this going? Give me a report. Okay, I've heard. That one I don't like. Rethink it. I'll be here tomorrow. And you go and play golf. Okay? But who put you there? How did you get there? The people put you there. It's all about we, the people, have to learn to unify and understand one another. Now, if you've got someone who's, shall we say, studied, let's say, steam engines, okay, and you just met someone who's working with electrical vacuum cleaners, you might say, well, we haven't got much in common here. He likes steam engines, I like vacuum cleaners. How can we share? But maybe you learn how the body of steam has integrated you to move forward in time, to understand that steam can be used in yet a different way. And maybe the sucking out of a vacuum cleaner might well be a way of steaming out my oven and getting rid, at the same time, sucking out all the garbage that's stuck on it. I would love that if someone would invent it. Okay, see, I have an imagination. You have an imagination. We can all create something ridiculous or something that works for us. It's up to us to do that, and that is part of psychology. Listen, hear, feel, touch, smell, assimilate all that within you, and then you have a perception. And that perception might be healthy or it might be ridiculous, but that doesn't mean it's not usable. Okay? So, working with therapists really, for myself, has been a major thing since, I'm just trying to go back and think, 62, 64, when I had my children. I was then starting seance classes, courses for people who were just beginning to realize they were psychic. So I was 22 and 24 when I had those children. And here I am, 79. So you can do the math and see 55 years of teaching and training people to be psychic, but also to study along with that, through me, their psychology and psychiatry as I've evolved with it, so they got more information out of me. And today I have a full course on psychology and psychiatry, which is a diploma course. I have many courses on all my therapies that are 5-level courses. I have courses to teach you to be an ordained minister or a coach or a counselor through the church. I am at this time trying to amass energy and information so I can build an online university for anyone, anywhere in the world, where we will have not just me but many other teachers, including Katie Kamara, who will have their courses and their classes in various topics available. But of course we're English speaking, so English will be the language. But that isn't limiting us, because if you're in France and you're French and you speak French fluently and you have a class you want to teach relative to psychic skills, healing skills, psychology, psychiatry, hypnosis, coaching, counseling, the list goes on, then we need you. We need you to teach on our format. I'm currently investigating how I can do this under the American government, but I'm not sure if I even need that, because we'll be doing it under the worldwide governments. So what do you consider to be the most important traits for a therapist to have? Well, I would say kindness, time, nurturing, holding a hand maybe, and giving a comfort long before you start getting a little stronger in direction and purpose to help them get out of that mood. So what do I do when I'm helping someone and they're healthy and well balanced when they come to me? Well, I don't do too much at all, because what they do is they talk it all through and I listen, and I'll say, sounds good, not so good. What do you want to do with that part? I thought about that, maybe you're right. And they talk it through to me, and I'm just a sounding board. But it's valuable. It's valuable to be a sounding board. So, what makes one decide to want to be a therapist? Just like me, there is a deep feeling inside that there are a lot of people around with sorrow and misery who are stuck in ruts, who are just looking for someone to help them. And you have that calling, you have that feeling that you want to help. That's all I had, and I still have it, and I still help today. People often ask me, how do I tell people that I've opened them up? I had an expression years ago that people were locked in a sardine can. Because you think of sardines, they're all stuck side by side in the can, packed tightly. And then when you get the key, you have to wind it into a little piece of metal, and then you have to very diligently turn it and twirl it around until you've got that whole top of that can of sardines open. Okay? And to me, that is very, very typical of the hundreds and thousands of people who jump on, say, a subway train, go from A to B to get to work, do their work, come home, and get on the same train going back, get in their house, find a drink, popcorn or a meal, and fudge till the next day begins. To me, they're one of the sardines in that can. They've got a life that is so routine and regimental that they don't think outside the box. So what I try to do is ask a little bit of questions like, hello, do you have a nice day? Yeah, I was same old day. Oh, would you like to go for a walk in the park? No, not really. Oh, well, I'm going to go out. Is it safe out there? Well, maybe not. Well, perhaps you'd like to come with me because I need some fresh air. I get them outside. And then I can walk and talk. And that leaves them with a seed. And that seed will be a very simple one. No, you have to this and you have to do that and you must be this and you must be that. I learned the hard way in my marriages. Don't nag. It doesn't work. And don't push. Allow them to birth their own ideas as they go through and have aha moments. Okay, so when you're counseling people all your life, you learn a lot yourself, listening, watching and learning. So I have to say I've transformed myself many times from a screaming, nagging bitch to a soft, gentle person as time went by. But it wasn't easy. When you have 3 marriages and 4 boisterous kids running around, you have to find a moment of peace. So what did I do? I waited till they were either all out or in bed, and then I'd sit down at my piano, play my music, sort of best way I could, not the best pianist in the world, and sing. And sing and sing until all that dark side of me had gone. Now what was singing doing? That each note was resonating with some block somewhere in my body. And so as I sung those notes, whatever that block was broke open. And so by the time I went to bed, I felt a lot safer, a lot more at ease. Hadn't solved the problems, they were still there, but at least I could rest my head on the pillow and hope to sleep. However, I admit, here and now, I'm a somnambulic. I am insomnic. I am an insomniac person. I'm saying it very clearly. I want you to hear that. Why? Because there's one thing I can't undo. The memory of being bombed night after night from the day I was born until the war ended. London was bombed every night. And I survived it with my mother, which was a miracle, thanks to Haniel, the archangel who protected us both. And I did see him. And I might add, yesterday I had a present. I went to the bathroom and the light was on in the hall but not in the bathroom. And I looked up in the mirror after washing my hands and I spent half an hour watching myself transfigure with all my spirit guides who used all my upper body, and I could see them, and a lot of them were Native Americans, male and female. So I have a tribe that I belonged to a long time ago that I'm apparently reacquainting myself with now. What a nice present in this time when everything is negative. So perhaps I'll be reaching out to some of the natives locally, or not, I don't know, but I know I enjoyed watching them all. You too can transfigure, if you're psychic, in a very hardly lit room and look at yourself in the mirror and see your face change, because your spirit guides are with you all the time. So I used to have all these one-on-one times with my spirit guides who taught me how to be a really aware therapist, whether I was working on a body physically or counseling. I can train you to do the same. So what do I do when I'm helping a person on a one-on-one basis, the first thing that I'll do, and that was what I'll teach you, is how to do an intake. Some forms are available you can buy, but personally I like to write them. I like, those little things, like they'll say, I can't get along with my husband. He scratches his nose and it drives me bad. I'll write nose scratch bad, because that's a little something that is bothering them, that they've made into a big something that will set them off the minute they start to try and talk about healing self. So all these little itty bitty things need to be written down the best way you can for you to remember and know what it's all about. Then you ask the person afterwards, how would you like me to help you? Do you want me to be direct or a little bit more subtle? Because some people don't like to hear direct conversation like you should, you ought to, and you could. Okay? Some people like it more subtly. Like, have you noticed that some people are out and about walking at night when it's nice? You could do some of that if you'd like to and make some friends in a nice voice, as opposed to, well, I'm hearing that you don't do any exercise and your adrenals are bad, so you better go out and walk and get some energy going. It doesn't work. They don't want to hear it that way. So learning how to be tactful, calm, soft, supportive, general in your information that gives them a choice in what they want to choose to do. All these things I teach and train in being a therapist, and that's part of the psych class. But it's not the be-all and end-all of it. You have to know the natures. A rigid mind, for example, is very hard to move, as opposed to an obsessive mind, which is stuck on a rut. And this is something that's driving me crazy. I need to fix it. Why? All these kinds of things have to be taught. So psychology and psychiatry is a very, very deep subject, and it involves your spiritual, awareness of how you perceive yourself in this world through your religion and philosophy. Now, if I'm brought up Christian, so a Jewish person comes into my house, I know about the Jewish faith. So I don't talk Christian, I talk Jewish. Why? Because that's what they're expecting of me, to know how to talk about it. So I also teach my students all about the different religions and philosophies of those different religions, so that they can then talk about anything that's going on. And what about the atheists and the agnostics? Yeah, we cover all that as well. And what about the people who are what's the word? Trying to think ahead of myself. Claustrophobic. Okay, they can't be with people. It's too much. I have to go somewhere where it's small. I'm on my own, running away from society. What about people who believe that they're going to be killed on their 13th birthday or 25th birthday or whatever because they've had a psychic vision? Is that true? There's so many things that we see in our head. How do we know what's real and what isn't? In my books, I wrote about the two towers coming down that I saw when I was up there in 85. Now, I wasn't having a vision when I found out they were coming down. I was shaking from head to foot, knowing that those buildings were unstable. When I got down to the first floor again, I said to my husband, oh, that was so silly. I shouldn't be like that. I should go up the second one. We went up the second one. That was worse. I couldn't even get out of the elevator. That was the worst one for me. Okay. I told everybody. Did anyone believe me for years and years? No. And then when it happened, it was exactly the way I saw it. And the most terrible, awful thing that I knew was going to happen was that many people were going to die. I saw the planes. I saw it all. But I didn't read it right. I thought, some people are safe in the plane because maybe the earth is earthquaking and the buildings are falling down. What a twist. You see, we don't all necessarily have all the answers. So, when you're counseling, when you're coaching, you have to have some part of you that's open for review because you might be taking the wrong track, down the wrong pathway with the wrong person. and so it's important to realize no idea is fixed. Everything is flexible. And when you're assessing anyone, and they come, you've always got to allow them room to express themselves. And I do talk a lot, but I make sure that they understand that I've gotten all the information. Is there any more you want to say? Because once I start talking, I'm channeling. And when I'm channeling, all the information will not stay in your head. You'll forget it all. But look, I've got a recorder. And you will get it in your mail to listen to it over and over again. And then what do? They promise me they will. Or those who want to really transform their life, they do. And they come back. I've listened, I've learned, I want to be put on the table, I want to change my energy, or I want to discuss a certain problem that I didn't bring up before, and we go into that. So it's stages of evolution, stages of growth, stages of losing some of the negative while gaining some of the positive. Everyone is individual, and everyone is programmed with psychology and psychiatry, with a heart of gold of love and peace and hatred. Yes, we yo-yo, and we have to be aware of that. For all my knowledge and all my wisdom, I don't get angry very often, but the one person I did get angry with was my husband, who's passed, unfortunately. I loved him a great deal, but he procrastinated so often on himself. And there are lots of people who procrastinate about themselves and yet put themselves out for others. Procrastination is a psychological state of mind that is negative, and it needs to be overcome. Then there's those that manipulate people with the way they talk, making them feel guilty or insecure, or pushing them to make a choice when they really only want the person to say, use my choice. Okay, domination, aggression. All these things we go into, and all my books that are available are there for you to read. The rejection syndrome really teaches you how you have a choice. You can walk into a negative scenario and always be negative, or you can go into a positive one and always be positive. See the best instead of the worst. There have been many traumas around the world, from earthquakes. I've been in earthquakes and survived and been fine because spirit guides told me where to stand, that kind of thing. I've been in car accidents, and I've survived because I'm meant to survive. And your spirit guides, when you listen to them, will always warn you and give you a chance to take care of yourself if there is about to be any incident. So any negative scenario, you have to learn to listen. Your spirit guides will help you. I'm looking down here at some of the notes I made. Well, when one of the things that I said, I take an intake and I write notes. Any intake, however it is, might involve a family. And so if I have a family, I'll see them separately. I'll find a common link, and when I've worked with them each separately to a point where they can come together and listen to one another and hear the stories and formulate new ideas, then we'll have a group session. Okay? Sometimes I'll have group therapy sessions too, where I'm teaching therapists how to do their therapy work with patients who are in need of therapy work. Or sometimes we'll have students bring in someone who needs counselling, and while they're counselling, I'm walking around listening and critiquing and helping in a nice way, because I want my students to really do a good job. After all, everybody wants to be a good coach and counsellor and healer, and everybody wants that to help them get out of the situation where they can't see the wood for the trees. So being with someone who's well trained really helps that person to be a happy camper and go on with the rest of their life. What do we got here? Oh, here is a question for someone else. What is the relationship between a psychiatrist and a therapist? Well, since there are many different types of therapists who doing anything from crystal work to aromatherapy to shiatsu, Reiki, and so on, the list goes on. Those are pretty silent treatments that while they're doing them, the person's just laying there and relaxing. And what they're doing is moving the energies that are stuck in their body, usually correlating with the conscious and subconscious. Whereas a psychiatrist is working more with the conscious mind, maybe reading body language NLP. So they're very, very different. And when you bring those two people together, it's usually quite an interesting awareness of change, because the therapist has to understand the state of the mind of the psychologist, and the psychologist has to get out of their head and understand the state of a body. So I like to teach all of this to my students, which is why there are 5 levels to all my courses. And courses come in the early years in the form of talks and classes and seminars and workshops. They get certificates for those. And then when they've done those, then they go into the serious training, where we have levels 1 through 5 of courses that have to be done. Books to buy, readings to be done, lots of homework to be done. I want tip-top students to be tip-top out there in the world long after I'm gone, so they can teach other students. So it's important that if you're interested in studying with me, that you have that drive, that ambition to make a change in the world. I'm not going to be telling you what to do. You'll amalgamate what you've learned from me and find your own way to do that. Okay, and one more question. One more question I got from someone is, what do I do when I'm asking a question? Well, if I'm working with hypnosis, then I'm looking for their insecurities and their fears. And one of the things you do not do in hypnosis is actually use those fears or anxieties at all. So, for example, I'm an insomniac, and so if I asked a hypnotist to work with me every time, this happened years ago, every time he mentioned the word sleep, thinking he was giving me a command. Here I'm itching my nose because I'm still working on my face. I said, please don't use the word sleep. So he did. I think he must have thought I said use it. So every time he used the word, I was like, I can't sleep, I'm wide awake, even though I was in a trance-like state. He was unaware of that. So when you're working with hypnosis, you've got to be aware of body. You've got to be aware of body trauma. So it's very important to find out what the issue is, how the person responds with this issue, where it's stuck in their body. And of course, when you come to it, had I have had any sense, I would have said to the hypnotist of the time, and there's no blame and shame here because they weren't teaching hypnotherapy the way they are today. So, that person did exactly what he thought he was supposed to do, having been trained. But what you have to do is find another word. And so over the years, when I've had people come to me who cannot sleep, I use words like slumber, recline. There are quite a few words, if you look in the Bible, which a person doesn't normally use, okay, which has the same meaning, and which is old style, maybe back from the 1800s that you can use, of course you can never think of one when you're trying to teach and talk about it, when you haven't got your notes with you, okay. But slumber is one of the words that I know I use a lot. and recline is another one. So those two came very easily. But I just can't find the other word, I'm sorry, but there are other words that they used. Retire, that's it, retire was another word, meaning I'm going to bed. And so you can find these words and you can work with these things. And the more you experiment with a person in terms of watching and listening to the words they use and then giving them different words in place, it makes quite a difference. When you're talking to any young ones, the best way to teach them is Storyland. Once upon a time there was a little fairy, and her mummy was a very strict fairy, and her mummy told her that she had to go to bed every night at 5 o'clock. But at 5 o'clock she was always so wide awake and she didn't want to, so she would go in her bedroom and she would start waving her wand and making all her toys go up and down in the sky and making noises, and her mummy would come in and say, "Please don't do that, or I'll make a spell to make you go to sleep myself." "Oh, but I don't want to go to sleep," she said. Right? "Very well," Mother said, "you may come outside and you may go out into the garden and you may bless all the flowers." So she was so excited, she went out to bless all the flowers, and there were so many. And her mum said, "Well, you better count all of them in case you miss any." And by the time she counted over 50, she was asleep on the grass, and her daddy carried her in and put her in bed. And in the morning she woke up. She said, "I was counting the flowers and I'm in bed. How did I get here?" And her mummy said, "Well, tonight you can count the flowers from in bed, can't you?" "Oh," she said, "I will." And from that day on, she fell asleep every night, counting all the flowers in her garden in her mind. That's how you teach a child to realize they're not afraid of the dark, because they're doing something else. Okay? There are many ways to reach people. Psychology is in itself a great, enormous topic. I could write hundreds of books about psychology and probably equally as many about psychiatry. However, with psychiatry, I don't want to embellish that. I don't want people running around saying, "I'm negative and so I'm doing this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to stay negative." So all my books on negative psychiatry teach how to become positive. Well, on that note, I want to say to you that if you've enjoyed this talk on my own, because Katie is not with me today, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I want to remind you that if you go to Soma Fusion YouTube live, you can look up Soma Fusion Mind, Body and Soul, and look and listen to some of Katie Kamara's, Dr. Katie Kamara, who has PhDs as well. Or you can go to me and listen to my many shows on soundcloud.com, Ask Dr. Margaret, or you can go to my YouTube page. Just put in Margaret Rogers Vancouver. All my sites will come up on YouTube, and you can listen to all my talks, many of which I did over 15 years ago. So there's a lot of topics and a lot to learn from. And if you'd like to review some of Katie and my past ones, then you can go to Somafusion Media and connect with Katie Kamara, and she'll direct you as to all the other shows that she's also hosting on her channel. So I hope I haven't overwhelmed you too much with my qualifications, but the point of this is to realize that I am probably highly more qualified than anyone who's actually gone to a university in America to study psychology and psychiatry. The best way to learn it was, in my opinion, through nursing, hands-on, psychiatry and psychology training, talking to my spirit guides, talking to clients, so many that it's in itself hundreds and hundreds of hours of awakening awareness in knowing more and more about the different traits of maladies and how to make them go away. And I'm happy to admit that over the years, with the help of my spirit guides, there are very few that have come for one session and never come back. And that's because they're usually drug addicts, alcoholics, and so steeped in the hate of the world that I can't take them out of it. And you might say, but why is that? And the truth is simple. Read my book, The Dark Side, and my other book, The Light Side of the Oneness. And you will understand that the oneness needs some of us to be dark, horrible people, while some of us are light, wonderful people, and in between, all those floundering around between the dark and the light who are creating energy. And that energy ensures that the oneness will always continue. We are the oneness. You are a vital part, a fragment of the oneness. So do your bit. Clean up your act, or go out and be the monster you want to be. Either way, you're contributing to the lessons of the world. And on that note, I'm going to end now and wish you all the best in this world for you in the coming centuries with your children.